Good afternoon, everyone. This is Ross. I'm going to be going over a project which I mixed and engineered for a band called Thanks for Your Time, which is I am the drummer for. Um, the great thing about this band is all the other members are also fantastic engineers, and they also have a good mixing knowledge, so it's always a blast. But yeah, this particular project I'm going to go through quickly and talk about what we did, microphone, and reasons as to why we did everything, and then we're going to go on to the mixing side of things. We've got Matt on guitar, who is fantastic. Brad as well did some acoustic guitar and some other bits, fantastic again. Adam on bass and keys, multi instrumentalist, we love that. And Beth, who is the most fantastic vocalist on planet Earth. And then I'm here too, but who cares about drums? So pretty much, if we start at the top, we've got the buses, the master buses, the instrument buses of vocals, organs, guitar, bass, and drums, and those are blue. So just to keep track of things. If I kind of go on to this project, we can start looking at the titles and our decisions for why we did certain things. So we've got a dynamic mic on the kick, because otherwise you'd blow it up if it was a condenser, which is a D112. For this kind of stuff, for kicks especially, that high kind of click, the 8 kilohertz plus, isn't really great. It makes things sound thin and undefined, which is why I prefer, like the Audix D6 has that kind of high end click in the 8 kilohertz region, but I prefer it when it's kind of softer up there and more so in the 3 to 6 kilohertz region. I just find that that's better, especially for metal and for rock and that kind of stuff. Then the i5 channel, which is like a side stick channel, and then we have for the snare top a condenser 184, which is KM184 by Neumann, sorry. And then we have the D4, the dynamic D4. Oh, and my decision to use a condenser on the snare instead of a dynamic is essentially because I like the way the transient sounds on this particular microphone. It has a great like high-end crack to it, which really gets through the mix. Because with a lot of dynamic microphones, you can lack a lot of detail up there. It's obviously a more sensitive microphone as well. The only problem with it is it's going to pick up some other stuff because it's a condenser, and they suck at room rejection. Small diaphragm is slightly better for it, but generally speaking, that's the truth. We have a D4 and D6 on the toms, which is both Audix. The D6 on the tom is a choice that I've been doing because essentially I like that high end click on toms is cool. The like 6 to 10 kilohertz, cool on toms. Not so much on kick, in my opinion. That's an opinion. But on toms, I love that area. And D4 is just an all around great bass instrument microphone. The C414s are always great on cymbals because they're a very forward microphone in the high end. They also capture a very large sound because they have a larger diaphragm, which essentially means that you're going to get more room, which is great because we love a big, lively room when it comes to drums. So it captures a big, large capture of the drums, essentially. And 414s are great on basically any instruments. I just like them on cymbals. I think they sound huge. Finally, we've got another 184 on the hi-hat, which is kind of supporting the hi-hat really instead of being a hi-hat mic. We did struggle to get the off-axis rejection from some of the other instruments, but generally speaking, it's fine. It does the job. On guitar, we didn't record an amp, but we did DI. I'm going to go through everything that was used on these guitars now. So on the rhythm guitars, we have Nolly, Archetype Nolly. On this amp, it's kind of the crunch amp. It's not a distorted tone. Is that the wrong? No. It's not a distorted tone. It's a bright, airy crunch tone, kind of thing. So we've got that bright knob on here, and then I imagine it's C414 and yeah, Ripple 160. So C414 is always great on guitars because it has like that sharp kind of 3 to 5 kilohertz, which is great for this kind of crunch sound, which is why I use that microphone. I'm going all the way in so that I get nice big boomy low end as well from the proximity effect, which is less pronounced on condenser microphones but still there. And then the ribbon, because God cannot get over it the ribbon sound, that smooth, rich top end with the boomy lows. I also love the Royal 121 on cabs, but this doesn't have that. But I believe I used that on the lead guitars, which we'll get to in a second. And then on the leads, we also have another instance of Nolly. This time on the lead amp. It looks like I've just switched around the microphone positions. I'm going a bit out with these because if you put it straight over the cab here, it kind of gets a bit fizzy, which I'm not a fan of. In my opinion, it's better to take it out a little bit and to bring back some of the high end instead of having that fizz constantly rumbling in the background. It's just a personal preference for me personally for when I'm mixing. On the lead guitars, we've got a Royal 121 and a 57. You can't go wrong with this combination, especially if it's a condenser as well. If you can mix a condenser in there on one of the other speakers, but here we've just got a 121 and a 57. These two microphones go together really well, because the 121 has a really rich, like smooth character, and the 57 has a really sharp character to it. The 121 has really boomy lows, or like really sub, kind of like that gritty low end, like we're talking like 60 to 100 hertz, especially when it's backed off towards the edge of the cone, like that a bit. And then the 57 has some of that sprinkle, some of the sharpness, which is in the 5 to 8 kilohertz region, which is obviously great for guitars. One thing I'm doing here is I'm actually getting my distortion from the Gojira amp, which is a 5150, I believe, where I am using a bit of an octaver, just a little bit, which we will look at when we're mixing, going on to the mixing stuff. And then we have the organ here. This organ is just from the Nord Stage 2, and then vocals, and then the crowd vocals, which we'll also talk about. The condenser 103, which is a TLM 103, a historically bright and boomy microphone, incredibly sibilant, but in a really smooth way, which I appreciate. It's different to some of the other, like the 102, because it has a better room ejection, I find, and it like when you're tapping, like if I tap on the back of my 7B here, there's a little bit of rumbling, but on the 102, that's really pronounced, and it gets better and better from the way up. As you go from the 103 to the 107 to the 49 of the TLM series, eventually you get smoother and smoother highs, and then the 193, which is my favourite microphone of all time, you have these really smooth, rich high end, which I really like, but the 103 does a great job for the harsher, more sibilant stuff, especially when it's a female vocalist. I find it captures those harmonics in the higher register really nicely. The crowd is a 414. I mean, it's got A, B, C, D here instead of left, right, because you don't necessarily have stereo information. And that's something I get sent often, stems where it's left and right on a guitar, and I'm like, well, there's no stereo information on it, so it's not already panned left and right, then what are you doing? It's just a mono signal. So that's a little pet peeve of mine. But yeah, 414s here. On the we put the mic in the center of the room, and we all crowded around it, and we kind of rotated as a group. There was 5 of us, and we have this little quartet thing here, which I'll get to as well, and the claps. So if I go ahead and go into the crowd here, very compressed, very heavily compressed to get that big roomy sound. Nice. And then finally some claps here, which are very heavily edited. Please stop doing whatever you're doing. Very heavily edited, as you can see. It took me 30 minutes to go through these claps and time align them all, but we got there in the end. And then we have this like Friends kind of clap. So yeah. If I go up here to the hi-hat mic, you can see what I mean about it being a backup for the condensers, or for the overheads. Very big difference, very important to the sound, but not particularly on its own. The overheads wouldn't do well on its own, and the hi-hat on itself wouldn't do well on its own, but together they bring this big stereo image of the hi-hat and the cymbals, obviously, with the overheads. So these toms, believe it or not, I've only played once in this little fill. Sorry, in this little fill here. which is right here. That's the only time that these toms are played the entire way through. I didn't cut them because I'm lazy. But yeah. So this D112. And we can hear what I'm talking about with that deeper bass. It brings the kick drum's response to about 40 hertz, especially with the tuning that we put the kick to. And then we have the 3 to 5 kilohertz click, the 6 kilohertz, 3 kilohertz, around that range, instead of the 8 kilohertz click, which we hear on the D6 on the tom. If I go here. So very different sounds, but very subtle. On the condenser here, we're using a sample. We're using a rimshot sample from Superior Drummer because I wanted a sweet fat room sound, which was missing. So we've got the original snare from the recording on the day. All that has been added is a tube 251 Tuts Telefunken casual 11 grand microphone and an RE88 RE88, which is a big ribbon mic, omnidirectional I believe, which is sounds fantastic. It's always been my favourite room mic. The only problem with this particular room that this was recorded in is really hissy. So as you can see here, I've had to do quite a bit of low-end cuts or high-end cuts. But we'll get to that in the mixing, getting sidetracked. So yeah, let's talk about exactly what's happening on a mixing side of things. If I start where I usually would start if I was doing this mix, which is vocals and guitar. Just closing down some things. Open up all the guitars. Let's start here. So, as we talked about earlier, we're using archetype Nolly. I think the settings here are fairly default. Now we got some gain going in. We've got the bright on. We've got a lot of mids, quite a bit presence and depth. I'm pushing it harder into the cabs because when you push it harder into the cabs on the master, it basically produces more mids. It kind of drives the cabs a little bit more. And then here we've got a fairly large cut in the high end. Essentially to get rid of some of this high end stuff here. Which is just completely unnecessary because everything past here is fizz anyway. Not really necessary to the sound. Got a boost there to brighten things up. Okay, let's get rid of all this processing. So this is the raw time. First EQ, second EQ. This is the Pultec EQP1A, which is my favourite EQ of all time. At the high frequency, we're boosting to 8. This is a very dark tone and a very bright mix, so I need to do quite a lot of boosting in the mid or in the highs even. Compressing quite heavily. Fast attack, fastest release. Need it to stay the same all the way through. And finally another another EQ with a big old high shelf to get that brightness. On the way into the amp we're compressing, and then we're doing some virtual tape machines because I wanted some saturation, some of that vintage vibe with a tape machine. On the leads here we've got archetype Nolly again, as I mentioned. Nothing on the pedals. One EQP1A, another one because they were so dark for some reason. I think it's the microphone choices, which doesn't make much sense to be fair. But yeah, it's just a very dark amp. This amp I always find is incredibly dark. I'm always having to boost quite a lot of highs to get that bright sound. On the guitar riff, the down and down and down and down, which is at the middle here. We can hear that octave. Add some depth to it that I really like. And then for a cab here we're using, as I mentioned, these for the specified reasons. We're adding quite a bit of present, quite a bit of highs, a little bit of mids, not a lot of gain. We don't need a lot of gain on this song. It's a fairly crunch tone instead of a high gain tone. Lots of mids being added, and then any resonance frequencies which are coming out we have to get rid of, obviously. Doing a couple of boosts here in the highs, and then getting rid of the fizz. Which it could have been more intense with, but hey ho. So those are guitars. Those are all of the guitars. Next up we have vocals. Okay, let's have a look. So on the claps here, we've got virtual tape machines on all of them. It sounds like a strange choice, but it's to get rid of the transient from the claps because they're very transient heavy. So if I just play these. It essentially smooths out the transient on the clap, which is obviously a characteristic of saturation that's going to remove some of the transients. Here we have the quartet, which we're panning left, half left, well, half left, quarter left, half right, and a little bit more than half right because I wanted the higher stuff to be more panned than the lower stuff. And we're compressing quite heavily on all those just to make sure that everything is the same volume so that I can just level it here instead of having to individually level here, which is a lot better when you have a bigger project like this. Same story here, compressing hard to get everything to the same level so that I just need to do it with one fader instead of four. And then we have the vocals. Lots of compression, lots of it. Colors in her hair. She's just a loner with. So if I go ahead and turn off all these effects. Colors in her hair. She's just a loner with a sexy attitude. So good thing the vocalist is fantastic because I don't have to do much here. In fact, the finalized vocals don't sound that much different from the vocals that we were sent or that we recorded. So it's always good. More compression for that characteristic tone on the 76. I believe that we got a ratio of 4. There. Boosting at 10 kilohertz up to 5 there. Bit of de-essing. And finally some very subtle pitch correction, just for times when it may go inhumanly out. And we also have some EQ which matches the EQ on here on the do's. Reverb send is from Valhalla Room, which is my favourite reverb. And then yes, that's that. We're sending a lot to the reverb send here. Just get rid of this. There you go. Well, that's better. Right. Let's talk about the drums. So this is the raw. We have some EQ added, 15 decibels of it in the high end. Because otherwise it sounds like a little click in the background of the mix. This is at 8.3, I do believe. Then we have saturation to get rid of some of the harsh transient. And once again, this is some tone shaping saturation. So here you will find that I've essentially done a multiband saturation with a warm tube to it's almost like to add the right amount of transient. So I'm overall shaping the high end with this, with the X saturator, because the X saturator has a lovely high end, which I really appreciate. So I'm adding that high end from there, and then I'm shaping it here, as you can see, with the multiband saturation, which is my favorite thing. I love Saturn so much. Adding a bit of a very wide band here and getting rid of some resonance in the high end there. And then here we just have some like a channel strip And then we're boosting a little bit in the highs. And then a distressor, essentially to add some attack to it. This is our snare channel, which has been replaced with this one. Oh yes. So this is my favorite compressor for snares, essentially because of its characteristic where it kind of boosts the low end into the snare, and it focuses on the low end. It has this I don't know what they call it. It's like a thrust thing, but it's fantastic, and the characteristic of this compressor and the punch is really what this is for, getting attack out of snares. It's amazing, incredible compressor for that stuff. And then some EQ, so adding quite a bit of high end here, and removing some peaking frequencies in the high end, and a little notch here. It looked like there was some ringing there, but nothing too serious. I'm removing some of the fundamental. This is our tube at 251, removing some high end. I guess it was just a little bit too tinny and too smacky. Removing some, or scooping it a little bit of that honk that was building up over here, it looks like, and then finally smashing it with virtual tape machines, because I love the contrast. Yeah, that has so much more punch when without the saturation. It's so much more transient, but that's not what I'm looking for with an overhead. I've already got that in the snare. I'm looking for it to fatten up what's already in that snare close mic with a bigger room, with a longer transient, but not like a reverb. This is like a reverb, the room channel. So that's why I'm adding that there. I want to get rid of some of the transient. And this is like the smash in it. Adding a big room onto it and getting rid of all of this, because yeah, like I said, for some reason this mic has so much resonance in the high end, or so much of that high end frequency content. It's a lot. Here on the snare bus, this is all three of these channels going into here. We're adding a bit of top end, and that looks like that's it for the EQ. It isn't being affected by this virtual channel. It's turned off. Remove. We're adding about we're taking off about 3 decibels, and we're focusing on the attack. We're wanting some more attack out of the snare, and we've got a fairly slow release here. I imagine that the rooms was too much and the transient wasn't enough. We just needed a bit more. We're gating the toms, and then adding some high end, and some less high end, but still some high end on the floor tom there. On the condenser, on the 4-on-4, the overheads, we're adding nothing on the EQ. We've got some. We're adding some attack to the snare, it looks like. Yeah, a little bit of attack being added to the snare and the with the distressor there, and some thickness with the revival unit. And then we're taking off some of the glimmer, the brilliance up in the top end. We've got a drums comp channel, which is basically just the overheads. Just smashing it a little bit. It's not blended in very much, and there were some phase issues, but just a little bit there, and we're taking off some of this. We're on linear phase here because obviously we've done a big old cut here, and it's a duplicate of the overhead channel, so that's going to cause some phase correlation issues. On the hi-hat, we're limiting to get rid of the snare, compressing to get rid of the snare, and then adding a whole bunch of high end, so that it's essentially focusing that mic only onto the hi-hat. So as you can hear here with the limiting and the compression, I believe we're side chaining, possibly no side chaining, just removing a little bit of the peak. Essentially here what we're doing, and you can hear it, is that the snare is the loudest thing without the processing. So it's jumping up when the snare is playing. Here, the snare and the hi-hat are about the same volume, which is what we like, what we like to see. for a hi-hat mic. Lots of compression. I guess there's a little bit inconsistent on the bass channel there, so we just bring it all together. Then we're boosting tons of 60 hertz, and finally boosting a shit ton more sub. And we've been over the guitars, and that is the entire song, I do believe. Ooh, just the organ, which has nothing on it. It's just raw. Okay, so that is the 5 colors in our hair project. There's some notable stuff going on, I believe, at some point. I think we've covered everything here. Nice. Okay, so that's that. That's the entire project. I hope this was informative at the very least, and you can see how the inner workings of our band and the stuff I'm doing on my end. And that is basically the entire project. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your time. This has been Thanks for your time.